Right, well, I think we can start. It's 3 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our One Public Estate Brownfield Land Release Fund Self and Custom Build Workshop. I'm joined today by colleagues from the One Public Estate team and also the National Right to Build Taskforce. Could we move to the next slide, please, Kate? Now, as you may be aware, last week, the One Public Estate programme launched the Brownfield Land Release Fund, or BLRF as we call it. This fund comprises up to £75 million of capital grant available to eligible English local authorities. The fund is made up of two pots, so £50 million for local authority brownfield land release for housing and £25 million for local authority land release for self and custom build housing delivery. Now, as the name suggests, today's workshop will be very much looking at how local authorities can deliver self-build. My colleague Abby will give us an overview of the Self and Custom Build Fund, and colleagues from the National Right to Build Taskforce will take us through the different types of self-build and look at how local authorities have delivered self-build in different locations. This will be followed by a question and answer panel. Due to the number of attendees today, could I ask that you post your questions through the Zoom chat function? You can do this by clicking the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. Just to emphasize too, today we will be specifically focusing on how local authorities can deliver self and custom build. We ran a bid writing workshop yesterday, which looked in more detail at the fund, the criteria, top tips, how local authorities can apply. If you missed that workshop, it was recorded and we will be sending out links soon. Today's workshop will also be recorded and a link shared with attendees and One Public Estate partners. Next slide, please, Kate. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to Abby Raymond, the One Public Estate Regional Programme Manager for London, who will give us a brief overview of the Brownfield Land Release Fund Self and Custom Build Fund. Next slide, please, Kate. Over to you, Abby. You're on mute, Abby.
Right, thank you. Welcome, everybody, and we're very excited to share with you the details of the Self and Custom Build programme. Can you move to the next slide, please, Kate? As Belinda mentioned, it is a £25 million ring-fenced pot for self and custom build, and as well as applying to brownfield land, it also applies to greenfield, so that's a key difference from the main fund. Funding can be used to, or should be used to, fund abnormal costs, and that most of these you'll recognise, such as infrastructure, environmental costs, contamination works, etc. The addition for self and custom build is that funding can be used also to service plots. Applications must demonstrate that the funding will address a clear market failure, and there's a definition for that in the FAQs. And we won't be able to go into all the detail today because the focus is on the actual delivery and the advice from our specialists, panel speakers on self-build. But you will find, if you look at the combination of products, the prospectus, the application templates and the FAQs, hopefully most of your key questions will be answered. Sites must release by 2024, and we'll come on to in a minute how we're looking for evidence of that in your submission. And in terms of what land release means, there's four definitions. One is around the disposal, straightforward out and out disposal. One is a transfer to a delivery partner or wholly owned housing company. And if the local authority is delivering it itself, it could be start on site. There is an additional definition for custom and self-build, and that will be at the exchange of the first plot, recognising that for self-build, local authorities may need to be involved to a later stage to get them in the position that they can actually be released for self and custom build. Next slide, please, Kate. The assessment process has 6 key elements. So first is the gateway criteria. I won't go into details on that now, that's fairly obvious on the slide, but the actual criteria that your schemes will be assessed on are value for money, which is 40%, and that is identified using the technical annex. That's a combination of a business cost ratio, BCR, and also GVA will also be included in that. And again, I won't go into the detail of that, but you are allowed to include non-monetized benefits if you are only able to get to a BCR of 1, and you need to get to a BCR of 1.5 to progress. So you can use non-monetized benefits of around 0.5 to improve the score. But again, there's more details of that in the FAQs. The strategic case is really important, that's 30%. And that can include consideration of government policy, such as the Levelling Up agenda, economic recovery, but also need. And it's important, I think, for Self and Custom Build to think about how are you going to evidence need. And that might be around your Self and Custom Build register or other evidence in terms of your housing land supply analysis. We are also encouraging applicants for Self and Custom Build to set out, I've frozen, is that's okay, I'll come back, to give an indication of why your scheme's like to be an exemplar. So the government is particularly keen to use this programme to demonstrate how Self and Custom Build can be delivered by other partners, not just participants in the programme. So we'll be looking for your commitment to share learning and experience, but also through the programme we are wanting to demonstrate how custom self-build can be delivered in different settings, so high and low density urban and rural settings. The next key criteria is deliverability. That's around understanding your key milestones. Where are you with planning? Don't necessarily have to have planning in place, but we would want confidence that you've got an understanding of what the planning risks are, and it'd be a reasonable advanced stage in those negotiations, or maybe having a local plan allocation. But the details is probably best to discuss with your regional programme managers. Moving on to innovation, that we think this is going to be something that custom self-build applicants should be able to score well on, because you use SMEs, is more likely to use SMEs. Modern method construction is another score, is another consideration in innovation, and obviously in terms of zero carbon credentials, your schemes. And finally, it's really important, is the public sector equality duty. It's only 5% of the overall score, but it's important to make sure your application addresses that. I think it's fair to say that actually the criteria for both BLRF and custom self-build are the same, but the evidence you will be looking for you to draw on will probably be subtly different, as I've referenced. I think that's probably all I wanted to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. And just a reminder to folk as well, if you do have any questions, please put these in the chat box, and we can pick these up in the question and answer panel a little later. I'm pleased to welcome today Mary Elkington, the Acting Head of the National Right to Build Taskforce. And Mary will give us an introduction to self and custom build delivery. Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. If you want to start off with the slide. I'm going to try to not repeat much of what I did yesterday. Again, it's going to be a very abbreviated look at some of the features of custom self-build. I'm going to go through a little bit of the basics and show a few examples and typologies. And then my colleagues, Tim Moon and Adam Broadway, are going to go into 2 specific kind of case studies and share some of the lessons learned on the detail. The task force is funded by MHCLG to help councils and other stakeholders on the rollout of self-build. We're also part funded by the National Custom and Self-Build Association, who is more the industry-facing side. Kate, next slide. Thank you. This fund, the Self-Build Fund, is part of what is the government Self-Build Action Plan, which was announced on Monday, which includes a help to build scheme, which has been announced. The final details on how that's going to work are still coming through the Treasury, but should be out soon. Richard Bacon MP is doing a review into the sector. The task force will be able to keep helping councils for another year, which is good. you will have seen a few weeks ago that CLG published their first set of the self-build data, because they've been collecting this from councils through the data returns for a few years. So it's all go for custom and self-build. So next slide, please. And just to real briefly kind of set the stage here on the key driver. If you look in the lower right corner, the new homes and number of, that's SME, small builders, where the big green bars are your housing delivery, left-hand side, and then the red line is your number of SME builders. And what you can see there is actually the number of homes being delivered stays fairly constant, bouncing around 200K up and down. But whereas the number of small builders has continued to fall. It took a big hit during the credit crisis, and it doesn't bear thinking with what some of them have faced during COVID. And essentially, this is an issue for a variety of reasons, but primarily throughput. The volume builders have such a large market share. I wouldn't call it a monopoly, but they have taken over the bulk of the housing delivery. So self-build, custom and self-build is a way of bouncing that delivery up. And in the right-hand corner chart, the international comparison, you'll see that the UK is really internationally an outlier because we have so few individually commissioned homes. And it's not strictly a question of wide open spaces, because if you look at places like Belgium and the dense urban areas around Austria, they're primarily delivering through individual commissioned homes, self-build or custom build. And it's not a problem in itself that we're not doing it like the rest of the country, the rest of the planet. But if our housing system was working brilliantly, it wouldn't be an issue. However, I think we all agree that there's things that need addressing in the housing system. So this again is a new opportunity. Kate, please, next slide. And I just wanted to share this. It's a little anecdote, as it were. So around a third of the population say they'd be interested in custom and self-build. But to me, the really interesting thing there is it's the younger generation. So if you look at number 2 there, half of the people between 18 and 24 would like to do a self-build. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the only people who can do it now are the people with the very deep pockets. And I know you've seen them all on the telly. It's usually a retired couple with a lot of money. And so there's a bit of a disconnect. So that's again something else that we want to address. Next slide. And we talked about this yesterday, so I don't want to overdo it, but just to confirm, self-build is directly commissioned by an individual or a group of individuals. They hire the architect. They may do some of the construction or some of the internals. Custom build, there's an enabler or a specialist developer. And again, this is a spectrum where some custom build enablers will just create a service plot and take that to market, and then it's over to the builder. Some enablers will do all the planning and design code and essentially just offer a small range of things for customization. So it is a spectrum. That's fine. Next slide is good. So again, it's not just large houses in the country. It's you can have terraces and flats, and these can be done by individuals or cooperatives, collectives. So next slide. I'll be on to the examples in a second. And just to remind everybody, the statutory duties that councils have that we're trying to help councils manage are the having to keep and publicize a register of people and have regard to that register, and then a further duty to grant permissions in line with the number on the register, but not the individuals. And I think Abby's comment about the assessing need, obviously your register is one measure of need. The task force on our website, we have some information about how to do a strategic assessment of need or a broader assessment of need. And again, that's something we can help you with. The people doing the examples today, it'd be interesting to hear from them, but certainly everything I'm aware of, when people do advertise plots, they're more than oversubscribed. So the demand is there. And so that's something to consider and we can help you with. So the next slide, I won't belabor this, just to go through, so many reasons we're all behind this. And this really is it's sort of a cross-party thing that predates the coalition. And it's something that it's a new housing supply. It's a new economic opportunity for some. for individuals, it can help with community building and affordability. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Kate, if you could do the next slide and go on to the first example. And now I'm not going to talk a lot about this. This is Craven Hill, which some of you will be aware of, which is the Cherwell Council's 1,900 homes that they've done with Homes England, and it's on former MOD land. And it's, you know, the biggest at scale self-build that we've done. And a brilliant example, and some of you will know all about it in their local development orders and how it's all streamlined. But the reason I wanted to show this is because if you look there, you've got flat roofs, you've got mono-pitched, you've got gables here and there, you've got different types of homes, but actually it does work. It holds together so well. It's a really beautiful place with a great sense of community. And the other thing you can see here is you've got people living in homes, and, you know, 2 doors down, you've got scaffolding. Now, a lot of these are kit homes, panel systems, so the actual build is a lot quicker. And the build is a lot less intrusive than what you'd see. You know, there's not a bunch of cement batching and the kind of things you'll see on a volume site of the same size, but it works. And, you know, the council's learned a lot about site management, and I'll talk about that in my second bit. So if we could click through, just a few examples showing how on, you know, urban infill and brownfield land schemes can come forward. So this is, and when you get the slides there'll be links on some of these. So this is in, I believe it's Lewisham, I can't quite remember. So within this development, they have 6 homes that are custom self-build. If you click on the next, and these were designed as terraces, but once they started marketing it and they got the demand, some of those, if you see in this example here, one of them was redone as 2 flats. And again, you say self-built flat, well, how does that work? Because you can't specify, you know, the fenestration or specify what you want it to look like, but you can get a shell and make it your own from there. So that's what we call shell finish. Next slide. And this is another example, and this is Islington, so it's very deep pockets. But again, it just shows what can be done on a fairly small parcel of land. This is, again, the applicants came forward with this as a cooperative collective self-build with 6 families. Next slide. And what they've done is created 6, you know, nice sized family homes. You know, they're not overly large, but really nice sized family homes. And they have some collective outdoor space, amenity space. And again, it works really well on a tight site because you're just filling in there. Can you go to the next slide? So the GLA has a small sites team that some of you, those of you in London, will be familiar with, which is, you know, great. It's helping with identify a potential land supply for schemes. Next slide. Next slide, thank you. But if you're not in London, you do have a Brownfield register. And I know planning colleagues who are very busy with things may not have time to engage with this quite so much, but the Brownfield Land Register is a great source of potential sites. And I'd encourage you to maybe keep that in mind as well. Next slide. These are just some of the, I mentioned enablers, which with the Brownfield Fund, a lot of the schemes might be where the council will be the enabler. But if you are looking for JV partners, or when you want to, if you have a site that you want to take to market, over the past 4 or 5 years, these custom build enablers have really picked up the market's growing, and there are people out there. Next slide. This one, Tadpole Garden Village, Crest Nicholson, and it's just an area of about 14 plots that they've put forward. If you want to skip forward a couple, and then one more. Thank you, Kate. Back one, I just want to mention this real quick, almost done. And this is, when I talk about a spectrum of homes, this is sort of the far end where this is in Basingstoke. It's called Squirrelwood. And these are homes. It's funny because they don't have on site, it's not called a show home. They have a plot design center or a home design center. So you walk in, and obviously these are terraces. Most of the scheme is terraces. There are some flats and some detached plots as well. But when you go in to buy a home, you're actually specifying what you want. Do you want open plan? Do you want it laid out this way? And if you think about it, if you went into a volume builder site and said, well, I don't want small rooms and an ensuite. I want 2 big rooms and a family bath. They wouldn't, they wouldn't know how to cope with that. Whereas, this is something designed for you to lay it out how you want. Next slide. Skip over again. Thank you. And just to mention that custom self-build can be affordable housing, and that includes things like discount market sale. The legislation is clear. It's about the occupant, not the owner. So you can have a rental scheme that is custom self-build. Obviously, you have to do a bit more thinking about how one does this. And I think you can have, the idea of having first homes or discount market sale is certainly compatible with self-build. And one or two more for me. Slide, please, Kate. And that's just an example of, this is a space NDSS compliant 1-bedroom affordable home that's going to someone on the housing needs register, built with a panel system, assembled on site in 5 days. And it just gives you a sense of how with some of these schemes, you can, you're not looking for huge tracts of land. They do slot in really nicely on some of the council sites, and how that can be done as custom. That's fine, go on, Kate. And also affordable exception sites, which some councils have done quite a bit of work on. And if you're going for this for the Brownfield Fund, you probably will have thought a little bit more about planning, but it's certainly one route. So I've just given you an idea of the range, and now I'm gonna turn it over to Tim, or back to Belinda.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. A really interesting presentation. So I'd now like to welcome Tim Moon from the City of York Council, and Tim's going to be talking to us today about a self-build scheme in Lowfield Green. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Belinda, and welcome to everyone. So yeah, I've been asked to talk about our first self-build scheme, which is also part of a larger development. So if you go to the next slide, please, Kate. So this is our site. So Lowfield Green is a former secondary school that was closed in 2008. A year later, a number of the buildings were set alight, and it then sat empty until 2016, where the site was then wrapped up within our first major housing development in York since the 1970s. So it's part of a wider development story as well, being the first of 8 sites that will see us delivering somewhere in the region of 600 new homes, of which 40% will be affordable through either shared ownership or social rent. And as this is our first site, the decision seems to be made to throw everything at it. So we have 140 homes with 14 different house types, ranging from 1-bed flats to over 55s to 4-bed townhouses, which we're building out. We have an extra care plot that we're out for procurement, public service building, a community-led housing plot where 19 homes are going to be delivered by a co-housing group called Your Space, and then the 6 self-build plots. So as the site is completely surrounded by houses, our first task was to create a new entrance through the garden of a small block of council flats that we owned. So kind of looking at what we've done, so we've got 6 self-build plots that have probably got one of the best locations on the site. So they overlook the village green, they've got south-facing gardens, they're on reasonably generous plots. So each plot was either 9 or 7.5 meters wide, and somewhere in the region of 24 meters deep, which then gave a build zone of either 67 or 85 square meters, depending on the size of the plot. So this build zone was controlled by the outline planning consent that we got, with it having to start 5 meters back from the front edge, 7 meters in from the rear, and 1 meter from either side. So with a maximum height of 9.7 meters, that meant every house could be 3 stories high, which is for potential for some really big houses, especially considering the largest house we're building is around 125 square meters. Which, with hindsight, we should have possibly looked to control that through the design code. But with hindsight, there is a number of things that we should have done differently, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. So all this information about the build zone was alongside material choices, ground conditions, which are blancmange, service connections, and other rules of the build were all detailed within the design code and the plot passport, which we had put together by our consultants, Custom Build Homes, who also then operated as a sales agent for the plots. So in November 2019, we started marketing these plots with 4 site viewing days spread across 4 weekends. We initially decided to go with a sealed bid process because we weren't 100% convinced by the values. And so just a few numbers. We've got roughly 420 people on our self-build register. We had 80 expressions of interest in these 6 plots, 40 separate viewings across the 4 weekends, and then 10 confirmed bidders. So the smaller plots were advertised for 85,000, the larger plots for 95,000, and the bids that we had in were significantly above that. Unfortunately, before any planning applications came in, a global pandemic hit, which we didn't quite foresee, which caused 4 of the 6 confirmed bidders to get cold feet and pull out. So those 4 plots were then remarketed and all sold within six weeks. So even at the height of a pandemic, we still had bidders for these. So 5 of the 6 plots now have planning permission, with the 6th expected any day. Planning had the additional challenge of our local plan going through its first examination between the design code being written and the applications going in. So due to this, planners were then keen to apply certain new policies that enforce stricter sustainability levels than we'd detailed in our design code. On the plus side, though, this did allow me to build some great relationships with our planning team, to the point where I think I could well be invited to the wedding of someone I didn't even know 6 months ago. All of our 6 self-builders are using local SME contractors, and 5 of the 6 are using modern methods of construction, with the 6th going for a standard block and brick build, but they are using a builder who went to school on the site when it used to be a school, which is a nice story. With drainage and the services, both temporary and permanent, going in shortly, we hope to have the first self-builder on site by the end of May. So kind of going back to that point I made earlier about hindsight, this is our first attempt at bringing self-build plots to market, and from the outside it looks like it's all gone rather swimmingly. On kind of behind the scenes, we've all been paddling like mad to try and get this through, because there was a number of things that we didn't foresee and we overlooked. First being planning, make sure they are fully on board with any scheme and liaise with them at every single step. So we had a text version of our design code approved, and our final all singing all dancing version that went out to the people who ended up buying the plots had images in it which our consultants had interpreted the design code one way, and our planners had interpreted it a slightly different way, which just led to unnecessary delays in the process. So if we'd got that final design code signed off and planning had bought into that, then I think it would have all run a lot smoother. Location of the sites, this is really important, and something we didn't give a thought to. We just thought, what's the best place for them? And they're in a great location, but they're not in a great location if the entire site is a closed off building site and you're trying to get in the people who've bought these plots of land that they own, and they just can't, at the moment, they just cannot access them without going through our contractor, and getting their contractors on site is then challenging. We could have resolved some of this by delaying when we'd sold the plots, so that actually we'd known that our site was going to be more built out, but by the time they came on board, but we were just too excited and wanted to get it underway as quickly as possible. Contracts, sorry. So there are various things to do with the self-build plots that just didn't go into our tender document, therefore didn't go into our contract with our main contractor. So it's been a bit of a slog trying to get our contractor to do things that we need them to do, but it isn't in their main contract. And they're looking to build out a £25 million contract for 140 houses. These 6 self-build plots are just a bit annoying to them. If we'd got all this in the contract to begin with, then it would have all run a lot smoother. Now we are now at the point with an awful lot of meetings, an awful lot of hand holding, and I think we're now in a good place, but it's been a bit of a challenge. So I've ended up being in the middleman between 6 self-builders who are pouring their heart, soul and life savings into this project, and a main contractor who's just not that interested. So it's been a challenge, and this could have been resolved if we'd had this stuff within the contract in the first place. Final learning really is about being really clear about what you're providing and more importantly, what you're not providing to the self-builders, because their assumptions have been made by self-builders, sales agents and contractors, and it's just led to unnecessary conflict and challenges that we just didn't need to have. So yeah, just kind of finish up, it's not been an easy process, but we've learned a lot and we're doing it again. So we've just received planning for our next site at Burnholme. It's going to have 5 self-built plots alongside 85 passive house standard houses. I just realised I had some other slides. Could we just flick on 2 slides, please, Kate? Yeah. So this just shows some CGIs of the 6 houses that we've had put together. We always knew, because our design code was fairly loose, it detailed the size and not a lot else really, a bit of a level of sustainability. But what we knew we could have had mock Tudor at one end and a white cube at the other and everything in between. What we've ended up with is 5 distinctly different, 2 are designed by the same architect, so there's a definite style there, but 5 distinctly different houses that are all built to a really high sustainability level, because everyone who's had them designed is going to be living in them, so they design it with an eye on the ongoing running costs. And the one in the middle, the square box clad in rusty steel, is challenging. But I think they all add to the local vernacular. Yeah, that's me done. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully I haven't rambled on for too long.
No, thank you, Tim. That was a great presentation, and it looks like a really interesting scheme there. So I'll now welcome Adam Broadway from Instinctively Green and the Right to Build Taskforce, and he'll be looking at community-led housing. Thanks, Adam. I think you may be on mute, Adam.
Dan, that always catches us out, doesn't it? Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all well. I'm going to give you an overview of the benefits of community-led housing, give you a kind of flavour of some of the issues you need to consider in trying to pull these type of schemes together, and use the K1 Marmalade Lane as the main case study. Thank you, Kate. So I think the principle to understand straight away is that community-led housing is about a group of people coming together to commission and design their own place, their own community, their own home. It's a fantastic way of doing things, but it is complex and needs to be done in a particular kind of way and order. And I think what really needs to be understood, and we'll use this in the case study, is that to get it off the ground, you need to be really clear about a clear marketing campaign. That campaign needs to draw together the initial group, the kind of early adopters, and it's really sensible in getting them together in something like a foundation group. You know, get them as the core people who meet regularly to kind of set the agenda. But one of the lessons learned from doing these type of projects are in a number of situations across the country at the moment is that we have to help these individuals who are not going to be necessarily experts in the field to operate like in a business structure. So you need to encourage them to have regular meetings, have a board, have a decision-making process, because that way they will move the project on quicker. Clearly, the site is crucial, and if they haven't, a number of groups, I'm working with a couple, I'm working with a group in Cirencester and Sheffield at the moment who both now identified their sites, but I know of other groups who haven't got a site, so finding a site is crucial, and hopefully this initiative led by the government and colleagues on this call will hopefully kind of identify some new sites which we can bring to the market. Having got the site, you then need to start to think about design and viability. And one of the crucial things in here is that in working with the group, they need to quite quickly articulate in a document what their brief is, something I call the client brief. And I think it's the most important piece of work that the group would need to do. When it comes to the scheme itself and the site, then one of the things that local authority colleagues need to seriously give consideration to is about the joint engagement between planning, housing and other colleagues, councillors, etc. Because in that way, the message can be quite consistent and you can get a number of the issues resolved at an early date. But all of this absolutely can only really take place if it's facilitated in a continuous way, not in an ad hoc way, which we had to experience in Cambridge. And that means putting somebody who understands the process, who can work with the group in between those parties to enable the thing to move forward. Thanks, Kate. So benefits to the group. So to look at it from the group's perspective, what the community-led housing route brings is choice. And often, if you look at the market at the moment, and Mary articulated this, is that choice is very difficult at the moment. And if you want a really good and affordable product, what the house builders are offering us at the moment and is arguably just not good enough to meet the kind of modern standards of modern day life. Affordability is also a crucial thing, and by getting engaged and getting in early, it allows people to buy something which is basically could well be, if it's offered on the open market, out of their reach. The other point is about the adaptability of the home. The Marmalade Lane scheme you'll hear in a minute, and the picture on your screen shows quite similar looking kind of house types, but I can tell you virtually all of those had adaptations, etc., which met the individual's requirements. And so you have that ability by commissioning something to get something that really does suit your needs at your present time, but also your future needs. I don't know a single group that I've spoken to who do not understand and want to deliver something really sustainable. And everybody is talking about trying to reduce costs, reduce environmental impact, and create a fantastic social community. And that is the key part of this. By building this scheme, by working together, you're creating a new community very quickly. And that has huge benefits, particularly at those organizations and authorities that have got very large strategic sites. You create the early adopters and bring them to the market very early by taking these concepts forward. Next slide, please, Kate. So what's the benefits to a council? So one of the beauties of these models is this is an opportunity to sell land, which you might not have been able to sell before, and it will produce a capital receipt. That will clearly vary, and I know colleagues on the call may say that's a challenge, but there are opportunities to create value back for the council. And as I say, it can often be utilised to use stalled or difficult sites. It's also, most importantly, as you can probably gather, that community-led housing falls beautifully under the new customer self-build policy and government direction, and is a really good model. The other thing I would say as for a council, those of you who are starting to consider this and you're looking to produce sustainable developments in the future, these schemes are a really good way of providing exemplar sustainable housing developments in a variety of different ways. I've said already that one of the other benefits is creating a cohesive community from the start. That's really important in today's society, because that in its turn can reduce the impact on other services which are extremely stretched, as we know, things like childcare, mental health services, etc. As I always say, when you look at these particular schemes, on one site you have your childminders and your carers all living in the same place. Next slide, please. I just referenced that K1 is not the only scheme. There are a number of co-housing schemes around, and a great example particularly for older people and downsides is the Ouch scheme in High Barnet, and it's a fantastic video TV program produced which gives us an example of that. And the beauty again about that scheme is it's not just all for sale. There are actually social housing, and I mean proper social housing, council target rents being charged on that particular scheme. It's a really good example. Next slide, please. So community-led housing in its reality. So some of you may have heard about Marmalade Lane. It was originally called K1. K1 forms part of one of Cambridge's largest first urban extensions to the north of the city, 1,000 homes, This site was owned by the city council and was caught up in the 2008 recession, in that a developer was going to buy it and pulled out. So with my colleague Stephen Hill, who some of you may know, he put a scoping paper to the council to say, why don't we try and do something different? And we did. We did it by actually convincing the council not to utilise their marketing budget in selling the site, but to provide it for facilitation money, a CCOR money, to help us test the concept. A long story, which we don't have time to go through here. Through a lot of work, probably about 4 years, 5 years work of working with the group, setting the group up, we got to the point where we had a concept, a deliverable plan, a client brief, and we were then able to go to the market and to find a developer partner. And we selected Town Chislehurst Consortium to be our development partner. They employed Mole architects. And for those of you who've been following the awards, you'll see that a significant number of awards have been awarded for the architectural merits, and well as the well-beings of the occupants. Members in this scheme own the houses are on freehold, and the flats are held on a long lease, with the estate being held by the company itself. Next slide, please. Here's some images. So some of the key features of a co-housing project is this utilization of space for the community. So whereas on the right-hand side, some of the houses have small private garden space, but it's not fenced in. There's on the left-hand side, you can see part of the major open space, which is south-facing, has some existing trees, and that is utilized in a whole variety of different ways, like allotments, play area, just general kind of space and calmness within a site, which has a couple of busy roads either side of it, north and south. And on the left-hand side, you see a block of flats. The other key feature, this photograph is taken from a thing called the Common House. The Common House is a functioning building, which basically where people meet and greet, have functions, has a kitchen and a laundry and some guest bedrooms. And that's the kind of the heart of the project, was critical in actually bringing this whole scheme together. The other thing is a thing called the Lane, where there's a kind of walking area between blocks of homes, which is bluntly used by anybody who wants to use it, but is full of children's play kit. It becomes a nice, brilliant playground. Next slide, please. The other thing I'll say, this is Jan Chadwick, who's one of the founders and members of the group. She came in about 3 years into the project as we were forming it. But what was crucial here was getting people who really were the advocates of the scheme, and they can talk to people, bring in new members. And she was a real treasure for the scheme and great to work with, who absolutely kind of embodied the whole principle of community-led housing. Next slide, please. So what are the lessons? So the key message I would say to anybody, that facilitation, to get these schemes together, it is well worth investing in having somebody who gives dedicated time to setting it up. Early engagement with planning. There's a long discussion, which I have no time for, I'm afraid, on this to explain, but engaging your planning colleagues, as we can all probably experience, is really key, getting people to understand that. I've mentioned the client brief. That is the crucial document which sets the tone and the agenda for the development. Taking a business approach within the group is, again, really important. Get the group focused, get them working in a very professional way so that they can give a professional exterior message to all the professional teams that they're working with. And that makes it a much better solution. And crucially, these projects don't happen overnight. Development doesn't happen overnight, but time and patience is critical to this. And if you can dedicate that to it, then you'll create places like Marmalade Lane, and all the architects and all the designers will claim all the awards which come with it. Next slide, please. So finally, I think this is my final slide. It's just to, again, give you an example that this place is come about by teamwork, getting the right professionals around you to not only work the scheme up, but to deliver it. So town, mole, architects, etc., are all crucial in getting this scheme to be able to be an exemplar of community-led housing, and it can be done. And what I would say is that the health and well-being benefits of this are immeasurable in many ways, and I'm looking forward to seeing the research which comes out of it to demonstrate how important these type of community-led projects can be for our environments. Thank you. I think that's my last slide.
Thank you very much, Adam. That was a really interesting presentation and some really good advice there as well. So I'll hand you back to Mary, who's going to look more now specifically at self and custom build delivery. Thanks, Mary.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm certainly inspired. I find it very inspirational, but also I think you need to go into it with a pretty realistic picture. So Kate, if we could kick off, I've just got a couple of slides. Now, apologies if I step on One Public Estate's toes here, because I'm not, when I did the slide, I haven't had a chance to discuss with them, but let's use non-monetary in the general sense here. These are examples of things that self-build, custom build can really deliver, which include things like looking at a housing mix that you're just not going to be able to deliver on a commercial site. If you turn over a site to the market, you may not get, and that includes smaller plots or homes that are targeted to certain sectors of your housing market. And when I say soft affordability, there has a tendency sometimes to build the executive detached or the overly large. And this is a chance for an intervention to kind of address that market mix. And the way local authorities are doing it, this is not necessarily advocating it, but it's just an example of the kind of tool you can use, is setting a maximum internal space standard. Several councils use the NDSS or say, no more than 15% above, for example. Some councils will have income caps on bidders for plots. And again, this is where what you're trying to deliver is not necessarily the biggest capital receipt. I saw a question, and I guess we'll ask Tim later about if they were satisfied with the capital return they got. Similarly, there's nothing to stop a scheme coming forward in the fund to bid for the fund for something that will be delivered by a private sector, a commercial JV partner, or taken to the market as a commercial scheme. Again, you can have private affordable housing, such as someone who's willing to undertake a discount market sale and local connections clauses. Those will have mortgage implications. So the number of potential self-builders is somewhat more limited in that case. And again, councils often have policies, and something that is a key issue or a key driver around custom and self-build is looking for things like the nearly zero energy or equivalent, or specifically requiring PV or MHVR or something. And next slide. So managing the delivery in the planning, and a lot of you I know have engaged with this, so you're familiar with the idea of site design codes. I'm not talking about the new NPBG and PPF version of it, but site design codes and plot passports. And ultimately, these really are designed to make it easier on your planners and DM colleagues. I think the comments that both Tim and Adam made about engaging with planning are important. And as Abby said, you don't have to have planning in place. You need to be able to demonstrate that there's a very good prospect of planning. And if what you've got is an infill development or a demolition and rebuild of some kind of building or brownfield, well, that will be policy compliant, and you do have a reasonable prospect. But be mindful that where you do have things, and I'm thinking, for example, like the Essex Design Code, which has really specific issues about the size of rear gardens. And I did a scheme there where it was custom built, and they wanted to turn it on its head. So you had almost no, tiny little rear gardens and a big communal green space in the front for your front gardens. And we ran right up against the Essex Design Code. So again, these are kind of things you do want to do a bit of work with your planning colleagues on that for design issues. Planning conditions and obligations, you will want to think these through, particularly if you're going to be taking a multi-plot scheme to market, in terms of how you're apportioning any planning obligation requirements, restrictions, and such. This will have you'll need to think about it carefully in terms of how you organize your Section 106 when you do get the permission, in terms of how you're delivering it or selling it on. And the good news is self-build has bedded in long enough now that a lot of councils have learned lessons the hard way. So this is something that the task force does have some guidance on now. We can help with, model 106s and thought through, but this is something that you'll need to consider in the delivery of your project. And also be mindful again that the SIL regulations, if you are a SIL charging authority, self-build scheme, something that meets self-build definition, it is exempt from SIL. The SIL regs impose a 3-year principal residency clause, and so that's something to be mindful of as well. And if you want to go to the next slide, please. When you're with a self-build scheme, you often get a lot of what aboutery. So what about if the self-builders drop out, or if you get death and divorce and you've got a self-build plot, what happens then? And every single case is going to be different, and you have to work through the specific circumstances and merits. And I thought it was interesting, Tim talking through the process that they went through. And again, everywhere that I've seen that has done a plot offering has been oversubscribed. So having the market, things don't always run smoothly, but all the evidence we have is that markets are there. But you do need to think about things like step-in rights, long stops, or clawback clauses in your sales agreement. These can have all kinds of contractual, and I am not one to give legal advice, but they're things that you do need to think through, run it through when you're setting up the scheme, and if you're taking a scheme to market in particular. Equally, you need to think about exclusion of any types of development. And so just be clear when selling it on. You need to organize sales contracts and consult, your build contracts, so that you can be sure you're not going to end up with just speculative housing being introduced where you had anticipated having self-build. The health and safety I mentioned in retrospect, in respect of the Graven Hill, and that's something that, again, it seems to be very manageable. We have colleagues who are putting together some advice on this. You do have issues where you've got, managing deliveries and big equipment and cranes, but again, because these are generally more modern methods of construction or panel systems, or they're going to be a quicker build and a much lighter build. So as you know, people don't like living next to construction, but the self-build construction tends to be of a different flavor than having Mr. Wimpy building 400 homes next to you. And again, the implementation and monitoring is something that you need to work in from the beginning, both in your delivery scheme and in contracts. And that's it, I think. Yep.
Thank you very much, Mary. So I've seen that we have had a number of questions come through the chat function. So without further ado, I'll hand over to my colleague, Jez Dyer, who is the One Public Estate Regional Programme Manager for London, and he'll be running today's question and answer session. Over to you, Jez.
Thanks, Belinda, and thanks for your questions that have been coming in throughout the presentations today. They're really helpful. The first one that I'm going to go to is just to confirm the land ownership. We've had a few queries around OPE encouraging engagement with community land trusts in support of self and custom build projects. And just to confirm that the land should be in the ownership of the local authority at the time that the bid is submitted. Following on from that, Tim, I'm going to come to you first, and you might not want to get into the detail of any sort of profit levels, but there's a question on financial return for the self-build projects, and I wondered if you could share anything in terms of how you have made viability stack up on those schemes, and whether you've considered those plots separately or as part of a whole of the rest of the development.
Yeah, so these have been considered as part of the whole development, which certainly helps them stack up. Now, we also already own the land, which again obviously helps from a financial point of view. I guess because I don't know all of the numbers. I haven't been that involved in. I've kind of said this is what I want to do, and our finance team's gone away and worked some wizardry on a spreadsheet and come back and said yes, we can do that. But because we're already on site, putting in roads, putting in infrastructure, that actually a lot of those costs are kind of are shared between the whole development. So doing them as part of a larger development actually makes them more feasible from a finance point of view.
Great, thank you. And a query around development timelines and whether we get to the point of land release within the March 2024 timescales, and whether the funding might need to be returned if that's not achieved. I think applicants should aim to offer that confidence in delivery and applications, but we do recognise that each site comes with its own risks. And if there are changes to project plans or outputs during the delivery period, we expect those to be agreed in writing by the programme partners, which is all explained in the conditions of funding letters, as well as the OPE regional team and MHCRG. But if after the award of funding but before the release of the land, the scheme is not able to proceed, then we'll consider at that point whether we can continue to support the project depending on the timescales and the criteria. And if we determine that we can't support the project any further, then at that point we may request the return of the funding if it hasn't been spent. Mary, I'm going to come to you next. We've had a query around the use of shipping containers as a modular build method. And I think the definition of the self and custom build is outlined in our FAQs, which I'll post a link to in the chat. But Mary, I wondered if you'd mind providing some comments on types of self and custom builds and other build methods that might be considered here.
Shipping containers per se, I know one thing that we're clear about is a caravan shouldn't be counting as a custom and self build because of the definition of development in the Planning Act. So if it's a caravan, that's not a development. Shipping container again might fall under the same definition. If you're integrating shipping containers, just as if you're integrating in a panel system or a form-based MMC, they're sort of logically the same thing. So it depends on how you're using it. I think again, I'm sorry, so many of these you really have to consider the details. And one thing we did say yesterday, and we've said offered to OPE, because of this such a large gray area and such a large spectrum of housing, that the task force is happy to speak to people about the nature of the build in terms of the who and how and who the intended occupants are, to confirm if it matches. If it's just putting a container or a few containers on in a car park, that may not. But I certainly know that some of the urban areas are looking at using car parks, and this is again part of this meanwhile use for the what do they call it, the community right to regenerate. So if you're doing it as a meanwhile use, it's a good thing, and it is housing. They are, but whether or not they're custom and self-build would have to depend on how it's organized.
Thanks, Mary. And I think we recognise that there are so many variables with this fund that equally our regional programme managers are happy to have conversations with local authority offices if you have any more queries specifically about the fund. Abby, talking of criteria, we've had a query around whether all of the units on the site have to be self and custom build, or whether there can be market on there too. And I wondered if you'd mind mentioning something around mixed schemes.
I think you're on mute, Abby. I think we've had a connection problem there, Jez. Shall I pick that question up?
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Yeah, so In terms of, so if you remember, we do have a larger pot of funding. So it's £75 million. 25 million is reserved for self and custom build. And so those homes do have to meet a self and custom build criteria. And then £50 million is for brownfield land release, and that's for local authority owned sites that deliver housing, and that can be any type of housing, whether that's private, affordable, etc. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Belinda. Another query around criteria is if the land has been transferred by the local authority to a wholly owned development company, would it still qualify as local authority owned land? Wholly owned housing companies are eligible to apply to the fund, and we'd welcome conversations directly with regional programme managers to talk about the specifics of each site and to make sure that they are eligible to apply. We'll post a link to all of the contact details for regional programme managers in the chat to make sure that all of those specific site queries can be answered. Tim, I'm going to come back to you. You mentioned thinking about things in hindsight and those things that you might do differently if you could do it again. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Yes. So our architects who designed the site never actually put any services on the tender drawings to go to the self-build plots. And it was just overlooked and no one was looking for it. So consequently, we went out to tender with a set of drawings that didn't show services on. So when I then came to our contractor and said, look, we need to have services going here, well, it wasn't on the tender drawing, it's not in our contract, we don't have to do it. And that just then put me on the back foot and in a very difficult position, very awkward conversations, and then going back to our finance team and saying that I need some money to put this in. They're like, well, we can't give you any more money on this project. So it's like, well, we're selling these plots, and they're not service plots that aren't going to have any services. So yeah, there was an awful lot of awkward conversations around that. It was also, we didn't have anything in there about fencing the self-build plots, even leveling the self-build plots. So everything we had to negotiate with the contractor once they were already in contract. And of course, they just charged us extra for everything, as a commercial contractor does. So yeah, it's been challenging, but I think we're there now.
Yeah, it looks like an impressive scheme. So it looks like you are. Abby, I hope you're there now. We've had a question in around the funding and whether it would cover planning conditions on outline planning consent, provided that they're capital costs. And I wondered if you could just outline a little bit what the funding is intended to be used for.
Thanks, Jez. It's difficult to get into specifics of a particular scheme, so I think that might need to be taken up with the individual regional programme managers. But generally speaking, they are meant to cover abnormal costs, and for ordinary BRLF schemes, that would be things like contamination, infrastructure, and environmental costs. And for self-build, it can be servicing the plots. I'm not sure where planning conditions would fit into that, unless there was some in some way abnormal. So, but I wouldn't like to rule it out. I think it would be I would suggest a specific conversation.
Can I just interrupt, because I know one of the questions that we've had from some various people are things like flood works and you know, kind of extra on your sustainable drainage systems and such, which can be a planning condition, but also an abnormal. Is that correct?
Well, I think if they're abnormal, then yes, but obviously not all planning conditions are abnormal. So I think it would depend, I think is the answer.
Thank you. And we've had another query which followed on from the session yesterday around the eligibility of local authorities. And again, this is linked in our FAQs, so I'll post that into the chat. The eligibility is the same for both funds. There are 7 Merrill combined authorities who are not eligible for the fund because they already had the opportunity to benefit from the £400 million Brownfield fund, which came before it. So those are all listed in the FAQs. Mary, I wondered if you'd mind just expanding on some of the challenges that you see for local authorities in delivering or enabling self and custom build sites to come forward where they have a demand, and what you think could be done to overcome those challenges in this context.
The challenges, as with everything, will be money, officer capacity, and land. So the three simple things to address. And so obviously, you know, the money and making something viable and financially stack up, that's what we're here to talk about today, that this fund hopefully can be something to push some of the schemes over the edge. Having officer capacity, I know when the self-build legislation came in, every council was given 90K in extra burdens funding, and some councils used this to fund a self-build officer and to do various things. Others didn't need to prioritize it that way or didn't choose to. So again, this is something that your assets team, your housing team, your planning team, it intersects with all of those things. And you are going to have whoever the project manager is will need to commit to not just preparing a bid, but bringing it forward. And that's what makes the difference. So having, you know, a remarkable officer like Tim is the difference in making these things happen. And as you probably guessed from his comments, it does take a lot of, take a fair bit of effort. The land supply and the land supply in general is something that you can address through planning policy. And that includes, looking for more custom build as part of larger and strategic sites. A whole variety of policy tools that planning policy tools one can do to bring forward sites. But again, I heard the phrase somebody said the other day about sites that are hiding in plain sight. And that's, I think, where this opportunity for councils to have a think about what they've got in the way of assets. Don't forget your Brownfield land register. Anything in there that doesn't have permission might be worth a think. And that's, the big challenge is getting the land. But again, I think if you look, even councils that don't think they have a lot of assets might have a redundant toilet block, or it's surprising, especially with some of these being small schemes, where you can bring forward a cluster of custom built homes, self-built homes.
Thanks, Mary. Tim, Adam, is there anything you'd like to add to that from your experience of the schemes that you've presented today?
Picking up, well, I think the key thing is, I think it's just been stressed, is that this is an opportunity. I think the land is always often in scarce supply, but it's that kind of imaginative looking at kind of land which might have some issues. And so it's great to hear that the government's recognise that, and this fund is hopefully one way kind of resourcing it. And what we're trying to say on the kind of custom self-build route is that there are a range of options which can be considered under that definition to kind of bring forward those sites, which actually we think can provide additional homes to people in a housing need of some form, and importantly, hopefully some of that can be affordable housing to kind of meet those other issues. But the end result is significantly better than what is often offered by the traditional house builders. We have a climate change crisis. As I said in my speech, in the number of people who look at this. I don't know anybody who's come to me and said, and I do not want to deliver a sustainable development or sustainable home. And this is a really good way of showing to the housing world, that we can build really, really good energy efficient, and modern homes for those individuals and for the future. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and encourage everybody to really grasp it.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, I kind of just like to echo what Adam said. In that, I'm looking to put in about 8 or 9 applications for this bid, and I'd encourage for this fund, and I'd encourage everyone to do the same. There's land out there. There's a demand for it. let's just see if we can make this happen.
Great, thank you. I'll just answer one final question and then I'll pass back over to Belinda. So one of the questions that came in was around whether it's feasible to submit a package of infill self and custom build sites that could see individual plots releasing 1 or 2 homes. There's no minimum in terms of how many homes could be released per plot, but it is a separate application for each individual site. Thanks for all your questions. I'll pass over to Belinda.
Thank you very much, Jez, and also thank you to everyone for your questions. Lots of interesting points raised. So the questions from today's session have been captured, and we will be updating our frequently asked questions page on our website after the workshop. And Kate, could we move to the next slide, please? If local authorities do have further questions or would like to discuss potential project opportunities, please get in contact with your regional team. The details are shown on the slide here, and they're also available on our website. If you have any questions about how to deliver self and custom build, please get in contact with the Right to Build task force. So finally, I'd like to thank you all for attending today, and also a big thank you to all of our presenters. And we look forward to receiving some exciting One Public Estate, Brownfield Land Release Fund, self and custom build applications. And just a reminder, the deadline for applications is the 2nd of June. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely afternoon. Bye then.